ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. An ESOP is a way for a business owner to cash in on their life's work by selling their company to their employees through an ESOP trust.
There's obviously attractiveness to this for owners who want to keep maybe the culture of the company, want to keep the ownership within the family and the employees. So you're creating a win-win for employees, for the owner, obviously the banks, they always win.
You're right about that. An ESOP can be used by a closely held business owner in a compassionate way to take care of themselves while at the same time taking care of others.
Strengthen the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle in your family business. This is Fearless Family Business. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fearless Family Business Show. My name is Adam Hill, and today is all about ESOPs, Employee Stock Ownership Programs. And my guest today, Kelly Finnell, is the pioneer of ESOPs. He's been doing it for over 4 decades, and so he's a tremendous expert. And I came into this episode not knowing a lot about ESOPs, and not knowing where they might fit into family business. But I'm coming out of this understanding that this should be part of everybody's consideration for an exit strategy. Whether you're considering passing your business on to the next generation in the family or looking at selling the business at some point, an ESOP is a great way to create a win-win to keep that culture alive in your business and to just create a great exit strategy for yourself where you get the value from your business that you want. So you're going to find a lot of value in this episode. I hope you listen to the whole thing and take some notes because Kelly is the expert on all of this. He's a published author who's written the book, The ESOP Coach. And he's the president of the company, the EFS ESOP Consultants, which he's going to talk about in here. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you like this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to this show, share it with a friend. Helps us to get the word out there that there is family business resources out there that can help you to succeed and reinforce the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle in your business. Now enjoy this episode with Kelly Finnell. Welcome everybody and welcome Kelly. Thank you so much for being here. This is going to be a great conversation on something we don't often talk about in family business, on ESOPs. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and I really look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the origin story, too, of where you've come from, how you got into this world of something that we don't often talk about in family business. I mean, we talk a lot about succession. We talk about a lot about passing the business on to our kids or transition strategies. But I think there's this idea of the employee-owned programs that you're talking about here that aren't discussed a lot, but they're starting to come up a lot more. And
yes.
If I'm being frank, I don't know a lot about it myself. So I'm going to learn a lot today.
Well, good. Like many business owners, I got into this business almost completely by accident. In 1979, that summer, I had just finished my first year of law school. And I had a job working for a firm in Massachusetts for that summer. And they, quote, stuck me in the pension department. I knew nothing about retirement plans. And this is just 5 years after ERISA was passed. So ERISA is that law that governs 401k plans and all other types of what's called qualified retirement plans. And so every Monday morning, we would have a meeting with all of the lawyers, and the head of the department would assign tasks for that week. And he assigned me a task to write a white paper on a brand new subject called Employee Stock Ownership Plans, which had just become part of the code 5 years earlier as a result of ERISA. He had asked all the other lawyers, I was just a law student at the time, and he asked them if any of them wanted to write this white paper, and all of them looked at each other and said, we don't know anything about ESOPs. Let's give this project to the kid. And in 1979, I was the kid. And so I spent much of that summer researching and writing about ESOPs and went back to law school. I was so fascinated with the subject and shifted gears. Like many people, I went to law school thinking I was going to be Perry Mason and spend my career in the courtroom. And I actually discovered that a career in business, helping owners transition their businesses to their family and to their employees sounded like it would be much more fun and much more rewarding. So I got out of law school in the spring of 81, studied for the bar exam, fortunately got that behind me that fall, and started my business in the fall of 81. And that's all I've done since.
Wow. So it sounds like you were one of the pioneers of ESOPs, really. Like you literally wrote the white paper for it back in 1979 and then just jumped right in 1981.
Yeah, and about 30 years later, I wrote a book on ESOPs. And so that book is unique. Most of the books written about ESOPs, as you might imagine, are written for lawyers and CPAs and financial gurus as the audience. There was
Right.
not really a book out there written for business owners that explained ESOPs in plain English without all of the legalese. And so that was my mission when I wrote the book. And that was the first 9 months of 2009 that I
Gotcha.
wrote the book. And it is a very simplified, business owner friendly explanation of ESOPs, with, I think, the most important part being a series of case studies. I think business owners understand things best by analogy and by story. And so I've got 6 case studies in there that are taken from real life clients of ours with the names changed. But all of the facts and the results as they existed in reality.
Yeah. And that book is called the ESOP Coach. Is that the one you're
That's
referring to?
exactly right. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. And yeah, I know you can pick that up on Amazon, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later too. And I'd love to kind of take a step back too and just and learn a little bit more about what the ESOP is, what it stands for, and maybe you can present it in just some ways that some of the family businesses can understand, and we'll get into how they can utilize this
Sure.
tool.
Well, ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan.
Hmm.
And so an ESOP is actually multiple things rolled into one ESOP package. An ESOP is a way for a business owner to cash in on their life's work by selling their company to their employees through an ESOP trust. So ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. There's also an acronym known as ESOT, Employee Stock Ownership Trust. So with an ESOP, a business owner sells their company to their employees using the ESOP trust and a trustee as the legal conduit for that.
Mm.
So for a business owner, an ESOP offers an alternative to selling to private equity or to a competitor. It's a way for the business owner to keep the business in the family, with the family including oftentimes children, as well as the company's employees. And many times, business owners think of their employees as part of their family.
Right. Oh
And
yeah.
so, for a business owner, it's a way for them to cash in on their life's work. For the company's employees, an ESOP is a form of qualified retirement plan. So, the best known qualified retirement plan is the 401k plan. And an ESOP is a first cousin, actually, to a 401k plan. But there are 3 things about an ESOP that are different from a 401k plan and allow the ESOP to work not only as a retirement plan, but also as this liquidity and succession vehicle for the owner. The first difference is, unlike a 401k plan, an ESOP can borrow money.
Hmm.
The second difference is that an ESOP can engage in certain transactions with parties in interest. And the third difference is that an ESOP is required to invest primarily in the stock of the company that's sponsoring the plan. So if you take those 3 things and put them together, the way an ESOP works is that the ESOP borrows money, and that money often is borrowed from a bank and from the owner himself. And so, in a typical ESOP transaction, let's assume we're talking about a $10 million fair market value company. The bank might loan $4 million, and that would be one source of financing. And the second source of financing would be a seller note, which is essentially the owner loaning money to help finance the transaction. And then over time, the company makes contributions to the ESOP, just like it would make contributions to a 401k plan. It's usually not a match, it's usually in the form of a profit sharing contribution. And that money is used to pay back the loans that have been made.
Got it.
And so we've got a retirement plan that can borrow money. It uses that money, I said, to engage in a transaction with a party in interest. And so the party in interest is the business owner, and the transaction is the purchase of that business owner's stock. And then I said the third difference is that an ESOP is required to invest primarily in the stock of the company. And so over time, typically at least over a 20-year period, the shares that have been bought by the ESOP are divided up among the employees' retirement plan accounts, and new employees and existing employees enjoy owning an equity interest in the company.
That's incredible. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I like the dynamic that you compared it to the 401k plan, and it's kind of as a cousin, that it seems to be another source of retirement. But if I'm understanding correctly, it's more of that retirement plan that's invested in the company. So you're almost getting a reward for the work that you're putting in to the company itself.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Adam. And so it gives us a way to have the ultimate alignment of interest, because the better the company does and the better the employees work together in the future to make the company more profitable, the more money they're going to have when there's a triggering event. And so the triggering events in an ESOP are the same as any other type of retirement plan: death, disability, retirement, or termination of service. And so many of the employees will retire from the company and will receive an amount of cash equal to the value of the stock that's been accumulated in their ESOP account.
Okay. Gotcha. And did you say that there's any dividend kind of payouts over time? Is that something that the profit sharing, or does it pay back dividends reinvested into the program itself, or how would you do
That's a great question. So companies generally do not pay dividends on the ESOP stock, but if they did, those dividends could be passed through the ESOP to the employee participants, or those dividends could be used to help pay down the loan sooner. So the loan could be paid down with two sources of inflow, one being annual contributions, and the other, in some cases, being the dividend that's paid. So we've got those two options if the company does decide to pay a dividend.
I see. That's helpful to understand, and good to know, as far as getting that return over time. And I see the value for the owner in terms of getting an immediate payout up front from the money borrowed from the bank, and then obviously the over time, the seller finance part of that gives that benefit. So let's talk about kind of the value of how building the value to get to an ESOP. Oftentimes owners will want a number. They'll want to hit a number in order to retire or sell the business.
Absolutely.
How does that usually go with regard to the transaction between the owner and the employees when that inevitably happens?
Yeah. So let me talk about how it ultimately happens, and then I'll talk about the process to getting to that ultimate result. So what ultimately happens is this trustee that I mentioned is going to be someone or an entity that specializes in doing nothing but serving as an ESOP trustee. And they're going to have all of the legal and financial expertise to fulfill that role. And so the selling shareholder with us working as their representative, will negotiate with the trustee, and the trustee will have legal counsel and financial advisors. And there will be a negotiated process between the two parties, the seller being the company's existing owner and the buyer being the trustee. And so just like in a sale to a competitor or to private equity, it's a negotiated process. But you're absolutely right. The selling shareholder wants to know on the front end what to anticipate that final price is going to be. So we've been doing this for almost 45 years now, have done hundreds of transactions, and we will prepare a feasibility study for the business owner on the front end. And in that feasibility study, we'll answer the 4 key questions that they have. The first question, as you suggested, always being, what would I anticipate the ESOP trustee to pay for the stock that I'm going to sell? So we will give the business owner an ESOP specific estimate of value on the front end. And in the overwhelming majority of cases in our experience, the business owner is very happy with that estimate of value. And in fact, it's often more than what they expected. And so we're going to provide the answer to that in the feasibility study. We're then going to answer their question about financing. As you suggested, there's going to be cash at close that's going to go to the business owner from the bank loan. So they're going to want a very tight estimate of what we would expect them to be able to borrow from the bank. And then they're going to want to know the terms of that seller note. And so good news, those terms are going to be very different than the terms of the bank loan because the seller notes are going to be subordinated to the bank loan. And as a result of that subordination, that seller debt is going to be entitled to an all-in return of approximately 12%. So in today's environment, companies can borrow money to fund an ESOP transaction from a bank at about 7%. And the seller debt is going to have an all-in return of much more than that, of approximately 12%.
Wow. That's a great return. I mean, way better than you can get on the open market for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so business owners sometimes, when they hear that there's going to be a seller note involved, initially might react negatively to that. Mm-hmm. And so I often tell them, well, we could go to a commercial mezzanine lender and get additional upfront cash. And then they ask, well, what are the terms of that loan going to look like?
Yeah.
And when I tell them, they often say, man, I wish I were in that business. Right. And I say, I've got an opportunity for you. You can be in that business by making a loan to finance your ESOP transaction. You, in essence, become the mezzanine lender in this transaction and get this very attractive rate of return on an investment that you feel is very safe.
If you're a family business owner or operator and you're looking to get more control over your business, I would love to talk with you. I want to give you a special invite to request a free 90-minute workshop with me to learn the powerful tools of EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Just shoot me an email at adam.hill@eosworldwide.com. Again, that email is adam.hill@eosworldwide.com. I'll put that in the show notes as well, and I look forward to talking to you soon. There's obviously attractiveness to this kind of transaction for owners who want to keep maybe the culture of the company, want to keep the ownership within the family and the employees. For those that are considering maybe a sale on the open market or an outside sale upon their retirement, what have you found any kind of data on that estimate of value that you get traditionally versus what they might get on the open market? What have you found there?
Yeah, we've got a lot of experience with that because about 35% of our clients have gone to market before they do the ESOP. And so many of our clients have hired an investment banker who has shopped the company to private equity, and they've received offers via a letter of intent. Some of them have even started the due diligence process on the sale of the company. So you're not going to believe this, but in over 40 years of experience, we've only had two cases where the owner was offered more in a sale to a third party than what they received in the sale to the ESOP.
Wow.
Those two cases were both technology companies.
Yeah.
So we all know that in the technology space, people will pay a huge premium for blue sky, for a bet on the future.
Sure.
ESOP trustees are not allowed legally to do that, but an ESOP trustee is allowed to pay the maximum amount that any financial buyer would pay.
Yeah.
And so we always see the ESOP trustee paying as much or more than private equity.
That's great. What's the benefit to the employees there on paying a premium? Is there a benefit to the employees on the premium that's paid to the owner? Is there some kind of are they taking a hit on that at all? That may be a
Yeah,
dumb
you know,
question,
I
but
would I would reframe that a little bit, Adam, because I don't think that the employees or the ESOP trustee are paying a premium. I
hmm
think that private equity is paying a discount. And so
okay,
think about this because it is counterintuitive to
yeah,
think that an ESOP trustee would pay more than private equity. But let's think about what private equity is. It's an alternative investment. So you have got very wealthy people who have invested money in traditional stocks and bonds and EFTs and funds,
hmm
and they have allocated a small percentage, maybe 5 to 10% of their portfolio to alternative investments. And so they might be expecting a 6 to 8% return on their traditional investments, and they're expecting a return of probably twice that amount on the alternative investment.
sure,
So private equity has a drag on what it can pay to the business owner because they have to pay their investors. In an ESOP transaction, there's not that drag on what they can pay. There are not those other investors. And so
yeah.
I think that the ESOP trustee is paying fair market value and that private equity is paying less than that.
So you're creating a win-win for employees, for the
Exactly.
owner, obviously the banks, they always win.
Yes. You're right about
That's
that.
right.
They wear a belt and suspenders.
That's right. So who so I mean being that it is kind of this win-win for employees and the seller alike, what kinds of companies benefit from this the most? We're talking about family businesses in particular,
Yeah.
but is there a size, an industry? What does that look like?
Yeah. If I could, I'd like to back up one step. And
Hmm.
because you talked about the two wins. So a natural question would be who loses?
Yeah.
And there is a loser. And the loser is Uncle Sam. The tax code has offered very generous tax incentives for owners to sell to an ESOP as opposed to selling to a third party. The main tax benefit is that ESOP companies, if they are 100% ESOP owned, operate after the transaction on a fully tax free basis. No tax at the company level because these companies are all S corporations and those are flow through entities. And no tax at the shareholder level because the ESOP trustee, like the trustee of a 401k plan again, those trustees are tax exempt.
Hmm.
So what happens if you have an S corp that flows its income through to its sole shareholder, the ESOP trustee, which is tax exempt? So you have Uncle Sam pitching in about 40% of the cost of this leveraged buyout. And
So
so there
there's
is a loser in this, but it's a party that we generally don't mind them losing.
I think we can all agree that that's an
Yes.
okay sacrifice that we have there. We don't want to
Yes.
pay more taxes for this, and I think that's a big deal because I mean a lot of the loss of that equity comes in the transaction in terms of the taxes paid on the sale.
Yep.
So we're avoiding a lot of that by going through this process.
Exactly.
That's
So I'm
fantastic.
sorry for that little sidetrack, but your
Not at all.
question
That was an
about,
important one, by the way.
yeah,
I appreciate I appreciate you going back on that.
but the answer to your question about what does an ESOP company candidate look like? My rule of thumb is that in order to be a good candidate for an ESOP, there are certain financial metrics. You probably need to have at least $1 million of adjusted EBITDA and at least 25 employees. Our experience over the last 4 years is that the smallest company that we did an ESOP for had $1.2 million of adjusted EBITDA, and the biggest company had 56 million, and the mean was uh, 4 million of adjusted EBITDA. And
Hmm.
that is not just our experience, that is what we see in the ESOP market. That's what the market looks like. And our mean number of employees was 95.
Gotcha. And
And
what's the
so,
reason it doesn't work on a smaller scale?
yeah, it's a good question. And there are really a couple of reasons. You need to have a minimum number of employees because there is a section of the Internal Revenue Code that was added a number of years ago. It's called Section 409P, and it creates this incredibly complicated testing formula to prevent what Congress rightly identified as abusive ESOP transactions. And I won't bore you with all of the details of that.
Hmm.
But the bottom line is the IRS has screwed us up as a result of this test. And 409P essentially means that you need to have at least 20 to 25 employees in order to be able to pass this IRS test.
Got it. Okay.
The answer to the question about the minimum amount of earnings is a matter of cost benefit analysis. ESOPs, in absolute terms, are expensive transactions. It's going to cost probably $500,000 to get an ESOP established. And the reason for that is there are so many lawyers involved in every ESOP transaction. So the trustee has a lawyer, the company has a lawyer, the business owner might have a separate lawyer, although often the company lawyer and the business owner's lawyer are the same.
Hmm.
And the bank that loans the money in the transaction is going to have a lawyer. So when you get that many lawyers in the mix, and on top of that, have an ESOP trustee, and the trustee has a valuation advisor, then there are lots of professionals, and those professionals result in costs. So when people ask me, what are the disadvantages of ESOPs? For the last 40 years, I've been telling them complexity. And so complexity means that we have to have lots of lawyers involved. And then the second problem with ESOPs are expense, and that expense is a direct result of the legal complexity that's
Sure.
involved in establishing the plan.
Yeah.
And so if you have, $400,000 of earnings, you're not going to be able to afford a $500,000 transaction. But if you're that company that had 56 million of earnings, your expenses still are going to be $500,000.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
there is just a certain amount of sunk cost in every ESOP transaction that requires that there needs to be a minimum size.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, and it introduces another winner into the equation, which are, of course, the lawyers as well.
Always.
Always.
Exactly. You're right.
um, yeah, and I'm curious to know. So anywhere between 25 employees and up, $1 million or more in EBITDA, and you're getting into the tens of $1 million on the mean there.
Yes.
What types of that kind of leads into a question of what if things go south in the business after the ESOP? What are the
Yeah.
ramifications there?
Well, I've been doing this long enough that I've seen some hard times.
Hmm.
So on uh, August the 15th of 2008, Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. I'm sorry, I said August the 15th. It was actually September the 15th of 2008.
Hmm.
Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, and that was the beginning of the Great Recession. Well, before September 15th of that year, we had done 5 ESOPs. And so those companies had gone from having no debt to being fully leveraged. And, the timing couldn't have been worse. Each of those companies, along with our other clients that had had their ESOPs for a period of time, all survived, and most came out the other end of that much better. And the reason for that is while banks do have belts and suspenders, when push comes to shove, they don't want the keys to the business.
Right.
And so the banks, during that period of time, gave waivers on their performance covenants. They said, look, you're not meeting your debt service coverage ratio, and you can't meet it in this economy. And so we're going to either modify or pause that requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Often in those situations, the sellers said, look, we're going to defer interest on our seller notes to the future. We're not going to forego it, but we're going to defer it. And when business turns back around, we'll restart it and we'll be entitled to get paid for what we deferred. And so we don't see ESOP companies defaulting on loans or going out of business. There are some who have, but if you have a carefully structured ESOP transaction where you maintain some flexibility in the way the financing is structured, then a company can survive those kinds of hard times.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah, it's always a risk that a business is going to get hurt, and of course things always go wrong at the exact wrong time.
Yeah.
I appreciate the examples on that kind of shed light on that. Any specific industries as far as that work for this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. And over the years, consistently, we've done lots of ESOP for service companies. You mentioned the word culture earlier. And any business where culture is the key to that business's success, those companies are always great candidates for ESOPs. Because if a business owner sells to a third party, that third party might tell them that nothing's going to change. But the reality is that purchaser is in control. They've bought the company, and often the target's company's culture becomes that of the acquirers.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to make sure that culture is maintained for the benefit of your employees and importantly for the benefit of your customers, your clients, then an ESOP gives you a way to do an internal transaction where you can be guaranteed that culture is not going to be negatively impacted. And in fact, you can be guaranteed that it's going to be positively impacted because employees are going to be pulling together even more than they had in the past because they're all in the same boat, rowing in the same direction, trying to maximize the value of the benefit. Now, not for the former owner's benefit, but for their own benefit and for the benefit of their families.
Well, that's what I love about this whole framework for ESOP and conceptually understanding it. Now you're teaching me a lot more about it. Is just the fact that family businesses give a lot of lip service to the employees being family, and this really does literally put your money where your mouth is.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just valuable to put the skin in the game. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on how a ESOP might be structured. We talked about keeping it in the family, so to speak. Are there hybrid approaches to this where it can remain family owned and still get the employees get a piece?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So it's not unusual in my experience for a business owner to need liquidity and for the second generation not to have access to the cash or the credit to be able to provide generation one that liquidity. And so we often see situations where a business owner might sell 49% of the company to the ESOP, get some liquidity, get most of that in the form of cash at close, because we're not selling 100%, we're selling 49%, and we might be able to borrow 30 to 40% of the value of the company. and leave in a will the second generation the remaining 51% that wasn't sold to an
Hmm.
ESOP. We
Right.
also see situations where there are two children that are children of the business owner, and often one of those children is active in the business and the other one's inactive. And almost a sure formula for disaster is to leave an interest in the business to both of them and to have that conflict between the active and inactive. So you might do the same thing there, sell 49% to an ESOP and leave the active child the 51%, have the business owner live off the income from the 49% that was sold, and then leave that cash to the non-active child. And so we see that as a use of ESOPs in family-owned businesses. We also see situations, and we've had several of these, where a business owner had two children involved in the company, but felt like neither of them were capable of running the business. And so they sold 100% of the company to the ESOP, which guaranteed that those children or that child was still going to have a position in the company, but was not going to be in a position of future ownership or control.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility in how it's structured. And
That's
yeah.
exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
And as far as governance is concerned, I mean, I know traditional like C or S corps might be running with a board of directors. Beyond the scope of after the ESOP transaction is completed, what are there any types of structures that are common with that, or do you retain the same kind of structure as board of directors?
Yeah. With any corporation, corporate governance works in a way that you're very familiar with. The shareholders elect the board, and the board hires and monitors the company's officers. That is true with an ESOP as well. The only difference is that the identity of the shareholder has changed. Instead of being the founder, it's the ESOP trustee. And so the way that process works is much like it would work in a public company. The board puts together a slate of nominees to serve on next year's board and submits that information, those recommendations, to the trustee, who is the shareholder. The trustee does the research, often interviews those board members who have been nominated, and then often votes for the slate that was nominated.
Right.
And so that very often consists of the selling shareholder who moves from the position of being perhaps CEO of the company to chairman of the board, often includes the company's CFO and maybe one other insider. And then the trustee generally is going to require at least two independent directors, but the trustee is not going to select those independent directors. Those independent directors are going to be nominated by the company's current board for the next year. And the trustee is going to do that same research and decide whether or not to approve those folks. And very importantly, the trustee will not serve on the board.
Got it.
The trustee is an expert at serving as ESOP trustee, but is not an expert at operating an engineering firm, for example.
Right. Right. So staying in their own lanes, obviously
Yes,
everybody kind of
exactly
stays in their
right.
own lanes, make sure the business runs well and the trust runs well, and all things are more kumbaya at that point.
And very
Um,
importantly, the trustee is there to monitor the terms of the stock purchase agreement. So, in
mhm.
that stock purchase agreement, the business owner said that after the transaction, they were going to be entitled to be paid in a certain way. And the trustee is there to monitor on behalf of the employees that the business owner plays by those rules that the business owner agreed to in the stock purchase agreement. So
Okay.
the trustee has an important role, but that role is not operating the business.
Right. Right. Understood. Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to touch on this term that you used in when first kind of got introduced to you, which is compassionate capitalism. Now I can infer kind of what that means, but I'm really interested. And I'm curious about that. Can you talk a little bit about what that means? Maybe where the
Yeah.
ESOP fits into that.
And so the origin of that was an article that I co-authored for Benefit and uh, uh, Benefit Research. And that is an academic publication, a peer reviewed academic publication. And my concept was that there is a history of compassionate capitalism, entrepreneurs doing work that benefits their employees, the employees' families, and their communities. So in that article, me and my co-author traced that history of people who have served in that role as compassionate capitalists. And then we talk about how an ESOP can be used by a closely held business owner in a compassionate way to take care of themselves while at the same time taking care of others. So it's amazing how many of our clients have philanthropic goals at the same time they're entering into and executing their business succession and liquidity goals. Many of our clients are focused on more than themselves. I have had this term for a long time called the greed scale. And on one end of the greed scale is Mother Teresa. And on the other end of the greed scale is Gordon Gekko,
Hmm.
the guy from the movie who said, greed is good.
Right.
So, in order to be a good candidate for an ESOP, you don't have to be Mother Teresa. You're going to be paid, as we've discussed, fair value for your company, but you can't be Gordon Gekko and be just interested in yourself and only interested in what the transaction's going to do for you. If that's the mindset, then the owner's probably not a good candidate for an ESOP. We don't use ESOPs, although some people do. We don't view ESOPs as a tool of financial engineering.
Yeah.
We are interested in working with business owners who are looking to take care of themselves, as I said, while at the same time taking care of their employees and their community. So if early in our engagement with a client, if all they're asking about is what's in this for them, and they don't ask the question, what's in this for my employees, then we usually tell them, we're not going to work well together
Yeah.
and,
That
might refer them to somebody else.
right. There's I like that scale of Mother Teresa to Gordon Gekko. And I mean it implies that it gets back to that win-win-win kind of thing. If
Yes.
everybody's winning,
Yes.
I mean nobody's going to win in a zero sum game, but if you're playing a positive sum game, we can create companies where everybody wins. And this is a great tool to make that happen. What so owners who are thinking about this, because I know we're coming up on time a little bit here, but as far as owners who would be considering an exit of some kind, how far ahead should they be thinking on this, and what should they be doing now to start making this happen?
Educating themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of people do that education through listening to podcasts like yours. And so that's always a good way to start by educating yourself. So there are podcasts, there are books, there are websites that you can go to. So our website offers lots of free information about ESOPs. There are also ESOP associations. The National Center for Employee Ownership, which is nceo.org, has a great website with a wealth of educational information about ESOPs. There's also an organization called the ESOP Association of America, and that one is TEA.org, the ESOP Association.org. And business owners can get lots of free information about ESOPs there. So I think education is the key. And more people are not reading, they're getting that education via podcasts.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. And again, I think, from the standpoint of ESOPs in particular, we don't talk a lot about them in the world of family business, but it's starting to kind of bump its way up. And I'm glad to hear that,
Yeah.
because what I want to kind of encourage on this show is that succession planning, to just passing it on from one generation to the next, is not the only option. There are a number of different options, and ESOP is one of them, and it's a very good one to help keep that ownership inside the organization, keep everybody working hard, and reward everybody who's been working hard for you as well. So it's such a great tool.
Very well said.
Yeah, and I'd love to know, Kelly, what did I, as someone who's very naive to ESOPs myself and doesn't understand very well, what didn't I ask you that I should have asked that might help our listeners to understand a little bit more?
Well, I think you did a great job. I think you asked all of the really important questions, and especially the one about how do I learn more and how do I know which of the many options is best for me. And I really do believe the answer to that question is education. And then talk to people, talk to an investment banker who might help you sell to private equity. Talk to an ESOP consultant. Talk to your own lawyer and CPA and get different perspectives and different viewpoints.
That's great advice. Just get as many viewpoints as possible on different ideas. Educate yourself. Knowledge is power. Kelly Finnell, thank you so much for joining me today and teaching us about ESOP, something that, again, we just don't discuss enough. But how can people find you and get in touch with you if they would want some more information?
Yep. The name of our firm is EFS, ESOP Consultants. Our website is www.execfin.com. And so you'll find my email address on the website, also our phone number. And I'm happy to communicate with any of your listeners via email or a phone call.
That's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. And also don't forget to pick up Kelly's book to learn more about ESOPs, the ESOP Coach, which you can find on Amazon. And as Kelly mentioned at the beginning of the episode, a very down-to-earth, easy to understand education on the world of ESOPs. If you're looking to know that might be a great place to start as well. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. This was really great, really informative, and I appreciate you taking the time.
But thank you, Adam. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks to everybody listening. And if you really like this episode, share it with someone who could benefit from it. And don't forget to subscribe. I really appreciate you doing so. It gets the word out there. And we will see you next time.